Chemical Safety, Part 5. In the Part 4, I have just highlighted the bullet points of hierarchy of controls and the order of preference with respect to chemical safety. In this training session, I'll go in depth, in detail, what is the meaning of hierarchy of controls and how we can control the chemical risk on site and how we can control, identify, and rectify the hazards at source while we are in a construction site. Point number one in the hierarchy of control with respect to the preference order, elimination to eliminate the hazardous chemicals. What it means exactly: remove hazardous chemicals from the process or the task. If you are not using a hazardous chemical, then there is no risk at all. Eliminating the hazardous chemical is the best way to control the risk. Consider whether you really need to use a chemical at all. For example, in recent years, paint manufacturers have been able to eliminate hazardous solvents such as xylene. You could also consider whether it is possible to use a different process which doesn't need a hazardous chemical. So it is well clear this is the most favorite and best option. But unfortunately, this is not practicable. And most of the times, we have to go for the next steps. Step number two in the hierarchy of control with respect to chemical safety: substitute the chemical with a less hazardous chemical. It may be possible to replace your hazardous chemical with a less hazardous one. For example, you could replace isocyanate based paints for water based paints. You could also use a less hazardous form of the same chemical. For example, using a pellet rather than a powder form of the chemical could have a significant effect on reducing inhalable dust levels. It is important that you consider the hazards and potential exposure associated with the replacement chemical to ensure that no new hazard is introduced to the workplace or the worksite. Step number three: install engineering controls. How you can utilize engineering controls to manage chemicals on site. Dear friends and fellows, you are on the platform of Safety First Life. If you are first time on this channel, kindly subscribe it and press the bell icon for all future notifications. And if you find the video informative, then like, comment, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Let us discuss the engineering controls. An engineering control is where some piece of equipment is installed to prevent or reduce exposure to chemicals. Engineering controls aim to separate your employees from the chemical hazard by placing a physical barrier between them and the chemical. For example, examples of such controls include: number one, carrying out your process in closed containers, which are vented to a safe place. Number two, using local exhaust ventilation, LEV, at the source of the hazard. Number three, using isolation, a containment hoods, a boots. These are the different forms are the examples of engineering controls. A spray booth used in spray painting or a local exhaust system to remove welding fumes is an example of engineering control. The correct design and installation of engineering controls which are suitable for your specific use is crucial if it is to give you adequate control. That's why you may need to obtain expert advice if you need to install engineering controls. This is not in the capacity of a journal site foreman or a supervisor. This need an expert who knows about engineering controls, how to use them, and how to select the right engineering control as per the nature of the task and as per the severity of the risk from the chemical on site. Point number four in the hierarchy of control is put administrative controls in place. Dear friends and fellows, use of management and administrative procedures to reduce or eliminate exposure. Look how the work is done and consider how employees are exposed to the chemical. Think about how the job could be done differently to avoid exposures. Where it is not possible to eliminate or isolate the chemical hazard, you should minimize exposure to it. This can be achieved by introducing procedures in your workplace to minimize the number of employees who might be involved in a task. For example, implementing job rotation. Point number two, as an example of administrative control, exclude other employees not involved in the task from the area where the chemical is being used. Number three, provide training to your employees on the hazards and safe use of chemicals they work with. Number four, ensure chemicals with hazardous properties are correctly stored. And number five, ensure emergency procedures are in place in the event of an accident, for example, spillage. A preventative maintenance program is an important element of administrative control. It prevents emergency breakdowns and keeps engineering controls working efficiently. And this is the way how you can utilize administrative controls, and that is in the preference order number four. Dear friends and fellows, to use chemicals, to manage chemicals, to handle chemicals, to store chemicals, to implement safety, to implement procedures, training is mandatory for everybody. Training needs to be well planned so that you and your employees get maximum benefit from it. It is crucial that on completion of the training, your employees fully understand what the chemical hazards are, what the potential risks to their health could be, what controls are in place to protect health and safety. Remember, we are talking about the training that is related to the chemical safety at work. After the training, your employees should be able to know how to use, handle, move, or store the chemicals in a safe manner, including proper use of equipment. For example, engineering controls or personal protective equipment. In the case of any incident or accident on site, how to safely clean up spills, how to report a problem, a near miss, an incident or an accident, and who to report it to. And lastly, what to do in an emergency situation if there is a chemical incident. All these points should be well clear, well defined when you are going to choose, when you are going to conduct internal or external training session for the people. Those are handling, using, moving, or storing chemicals on site. If training is not protective, it means it is just a waste of time and money. That's why there must be a training assessment. And there are different ways how you can assess whether the safety training was beneficial or not. After the training, your people, your workers, they must know how to store the chemicals safely. Hazardous chemicals should be stored under appropriate conditions, taking into account the chemical specific properties. Instructions on safe storage of chemicals can be found in Section 7 of the SDS Safety Data Sheet. It is also important to note if there are conditions under which hazardous reactions may occur. Dear friends and fellows, you are watching Safety First Life. And today we are talking about chemicals safety, how to control chemicals, how to manage chemicals on site. And we're discussing hierarchy of control, the training needs, and the assessment of risk with respect to chemicals on site. We are talking about safe storage of chemicals. For example, chemicals that can react together to form unstable or toxic products or produce heat should be kept segregated. Flammable liquids stored near a heat source could result in a fire. Section 10 of the SDS Safety Data Sheet gives advice on such conditions that you should take into account when storing your chemicals. These sections, 16 sections, I have mentioned already in my previous video. So SDS should be in front of you when you're going to use or store chemicals on site and you are at work. Chemicals known to be carcinogenic, mutagenic, or toxic to reproduction should be kept under strict control because these are very hazardous chemicals. Chemicals with typical properties and characteristics that are relevant include flammable chemicals, toxic or corrosive chemicals, chemicals that emit highly toxic fumes in the event of a fire, chemicals which in contact with water give off flammable gas, oxidizing chemicals, explosives, unstable chemicals, and compressed gases. These are the different varieties or types or classes of chemicals. Those are hazardous and their SDS safety data sheet must be available with the chemicals and it must be provided to the workers, users, storekeepers, and the responsible staff. Those are dealing with chemicals on your project site. Dear friends and fellows, when storing chemicals, you should consider the compatibility of different chemicals. For example, oxidizing chemicals should be kept separate from the flammable liquids or other flammable chemicals. Few important points you need to consider whenever you are dealing with chemicals. Number one, limiting the quantities of chemicals to be stored. Number two, ensuring there is adequate security of and access to storage areas. Potential ignition sources should be prohibited or controlled. Number three, a safe location for storage areas. In order to minimize the effects of an incident, storage areas for chemicals should be kept separate from process areas, occupied buildings, and the other storage areas. Number four, the appropriate construction, nature, and the integrity of storage containers. Number five, safe loading, unloading, and transport around the workplace. Number six, adequate precautions and procedures in case of spillage. Number seven, temperature, humidity, and ventilation arrangements. Ventilation arrangements should ensure that there is no accumulation of gases, vapors, or fumes in enclosed containers or areas. These are very important points. With respect to chemical storage on site, let us discuss now the emergency measures. It is important that you and your employees know what to do in case of an accident or incident or emergency involving chemicals. This may include your evacuation procedure, evacuation plan, or what to do in case of accidental exposure to a chemical. Did you know there are several spill kits available commercially to deal with a range of hazardous chemicals? You should ensure that you have a suitable spill kit or kits available in the event of an incident on your work site in your project. As a safety practitioner, as an environmental engineer, it is your responsibility to demand these spill kits in advance. You will not wait for the incident or exposure of chemicals. Section 4 of the SDS safety data sheet describes the necessary first aid measures to be taken in case of an accident or incident. Section 5 of the SDS safety data sheet gives specific information on fighting a fire caused by the chemical, including the most suitable extinguishing media and protective equipment to use. Section 6 of the SDS safety data sheet describes what actions need to be taken if there is an accidental release of the chemical. Dear friends and fellows, we are discussing chemical safety and we are going through the hierarchy of controls, how to store chemicals safely, how to find information from SDS safety data sheet. Let us discuss now the safe disposal of chemicals. Refer to section 13 of your SDS safety data sheet to confirm the correct disposal procedure for your chemicals. You can also record this information on your chemical inventory for ease of reference. If you are in doubt as to the safety of any chemical disposal procedure, contact the Environmental Protection Agency for further advice or the chemical manufacturer or the supplier. Only use a licensed hazardous waste disposal contractor when you need to dispose of chemicals from your site. After discussing the administrative control, let us discuss now the last point, personal protective equipment. Point number 5, and you know very well, this is the last line of defense. Dear friends and fellows, the use of personal protective equipment should be the last line of defense and not regarded as an alternative to other suitable control measures which are higher up the hierarchy. It should provide adequate protection against the risk from the hazardous chemicals to which the wearer is exposed for the duration of the exposure, taking into account the type of work being carried out. In practical terms, you may have to apply a number of control measures. For example, even with good engineering controls, you may still need to examine whether administrative controls and the personal protective equipment are also needed. The further up the hierarchy you take action, the better. You don't want to be in a situation where you are highly reliant on PP for protection from chemical hazards. If you think PP in the placement of elimination, you are totally wrong. Your concept is not clear. Section 8 of the SDS safety data sheet gives advice on steps needed to reduce exposure, including advice on appropriate personal protective equipment. Personal protective equipment can include eye face protection, for example, safety glasses, goggles, or face shield, skin protection, for example, chemical resistant footwear, shoes, boots, clothing, aprons, or suits. These all for skin protection. Hand protection, for example, gloves, disposable or otherwise, which are suitable for the job. Respiratory protection, for example, respirators, masks, or hoods that give adequate protection. Thermal protection. Employees may need to be protected from excessive heat or cold with appropriate clothing. These all are the different examples of personal protective equipment. Dear friends and fellows, this is Chemical Safety Part 5. In the upcoming training session, I'll discuss atmospheric monitoring, health surveillance requirements, the details of controls in hand, and the details of controls needed for a workplace to control the chemicals safely as a minimum requirement. And that's all for now. Training session, Chemical Safety Part 5 is over. If you have any question, please ask in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. Hope to see you soon with a new HSC tutorial. Until then, take care. Good luck and goodbye.